You.
Me.
Judge Harrow received her at 6 in the morning. He was 73 and retired, and he had the energy of someone who had been waiting for a specific phone call for 5 years and had not slept well in the interim. He took the evidence without drama, looked through it with the methodical focus of a man who had spent 40 years building cases and knew immediately what he was looking at. He made 4 calls from his private line. He asked her 3 questions, all technical, all precise. He asked her if she was prepared to testify. She said yes. He looked at her for a moment with the specific expression of someone who had seen many people say yes and knew the difference between the ones who meant it and the ones who thought they meant it. Then he said, "Good." He made a 5th call. The case moved into judicial channels that Victor's lawyers could not reach. The sealed documentation of Victor's 2020 approach to Harrow, combined with Sienna's evidence, produced a submission that was filed before 7 in the morning. At 8:15, federal agents arrived at Victor Hale's apartment. She heard about this from Harrow's assistant, who was a precise woman of 30 who delivered information with the efficiency of someone who had been delivering Judge Harrow's information for a decade. She sat in Harrow's waiting room and felt something she had not felt in 2 weeks. The specific exhaustion that only arrives when a thing that has been held very tightly is finally allowed to release. She watched the arrest from across the street. She had not planned to be there. She had been told the location by Harrow's assistant, the kind of information that was not offered without being asked, which meant Harrow had anticipated she would want to see it and had made it available. She stood on the opposite pavement with coffee she had bought from the first place she had passed and watched federal agents enter a Tribeca building and emerge 11 minutes later with Victor Hale in handcuffs. He looked different in handcuffs. Not diminished, that was not the right word, because the kind of man Victor was could not be diminished by circumstance alone. Contained was better. The precise, deliberate containment of a force that had been moving freely for too long and had finally been stopped. His face was controlled until they put him in the car, at which point she saw, from 30 meters away, in a fraction of a second, the expression that the control had been covering. Not fear. Something more interesting. The specific expression of a man who has been absolutely certain for years that he was the smartest person in any room, finally understanding that he was not. Marcus Reed was arrested 2 hours later. She did not watch that one. She had 6 years of professional respect for Marcus Reed, and the discovery that he had been compromised was the kind of thing she was going to need to be far away from this city to process. She filed it away. There was time later for the feelings. Right now there was Rafael, still in federal custody, still waiting for the case against him to formally collapse. The formal charges against Rafael Cross were dropped at 2:17 in the afternoon. She knew the exact time because she was sitting in the waiting area of the Federal Processing Center when Harrow's assistant called and gave her the news in the precise, efficient tone she had been using all day. And Sienna looked at the clock on the wall while she was processing it, and the time stayed in her memory. She had told herself she was not going to be there when he walked out. She had told herself this was a professional conclusion, and professional conclusions did not require waiting outside federal buildings in the afternoon. She told herself this for approximately 45 minutes and then got in a cab. He came through the side entrance at 3:12. Suit slightly wrinkled for the first time she had ever seen. No tie. He looked exactly like himself, the composure intact, the unhurried certainty of his movement intact, and then he saw her on the steps and something in the composure moved. Not dramatically. The specific movement of something that has been very carefully held, allowing itself to ease. She was halfway down the steps when she stopped herself and thought about the professional version of this moment. The clean exit. The case concluded, the subjects separate, the appropriate institutional distance maintained. She thought about it for approximately 3 seconds. Then she walked the rest of the way down the steps. They stood on the federal building steps in the afternoon light. The city was very loud around them, New York's particular noise that never stopped, and they were in the middle of it, and she thought that was appropriate somehow. Not a quiet moment, not a private room. The whole city as the context for the end of the thing they had been inside for 2 weeks. He said, "You did it." She said, "We did it." He said, "You did the part that required doing alone." She thought about the hotel lobby at midnight, the evidence and the coffee she had not drunk, and Victor across the table offering her a clean exit she had not taken. She said, "I've done harder." He almost smiled, the full smile this time, not the fragment she had been seeing for 2 weeks. It changed his face. It was the smile of someone who had not had much reason to smile in 3 years and had found one. She said, "What happens now?" He was quiet for a moment, looking at her. She had been looked at by Rafael Cross for 2 weeks in the specific way that she had been cataloging and trying to professionally classify for the same 2 weeks. And standing in the afternoon light on the federal building steps, she stopped trying to classify it. Now, he said, "You stop pretending to work for me." She raised an eyebrow. She said, "And what do I do instead?" He looked at her. He said, "You have dinner with me, without the surveillance equipment, without the cover story, without any reason except that you want to." She looked at him, the city behind him, everything that had happened in 2 weeks. She said, "That sounds dangerous." He said, "Everything worth having is." She laughed. Properly, genuinely, the laugh of someone who had not laughed like that in 2 weeks of calculated everything. He watched her laugh with the expression of someone who had been patient for a very long time and had discovered the patience was worth it. She held out her hand, not a handshake, a choice. He looked at her hand, then he took it. The trial of Victor Hale lasted 11 days. Sienna testified for 4 hours on the 3rd day. She sat in the witness box and built the financial case with the precision she had spent 12 years developing, and gave the jury a version of Victor's crime that was impossible to argue with because it was the truth, and she had documented every inch of it. Victor's lawyers tried 3 different approaches to discrediting her testimony. None of them worked. She was the best at what she did. She had been that before any of this happened, and she was still that after. Victor was convicted on 9 counts. Marcus Reed entered a plea agreement. 3 of Victor's associates in the shell company structure were indicted separately in a proceeding that Sienna had no professional involvement in, and followed from a distance with the specific satisfaction of someone watching a long-running consequence arrive at its conclusion. The FBI opened an inquiry into the original case against Rafael Cross. She was not part of that team, appropriate distance, but she was called as a consultant twice, and she gave her analysis without holding anything back. She did not know how it would end for Eduardo's name. She hoped it would end right. She thought it would. Rafael rebuilt the company. It took 8 months and the full scope of everything he had, the $4.2 billion, the network, the 3 years of careful preparation for a version of the future that had always included this outcome. Cross Empire came through it. She had never doubted that it would. She had told him so, on the night before the trial started, over dinner at a corner restaurant with no surveillance equipment and no cover story and every reason to be there. He had looked at her across the table and said, "How certain are you?" She had said, "Certain enough to be here." He had not said anything else. He had reached across the table and taken her hand. She had let him.
I want it on record that I found the ghost account before you showed me anything.